we are going to get started. Now, I'm gonna put up my slides for just a moment so that you'll be able to see what we're doing here. We have, unfortunately, 3 Torah portions. Because we do not meet on the 3rd week of the month, we are dealing with Torah portion Pinchas, Matot, and Masei. And so that is literally Numbers chapter 25 through 36. That takes us to the end of the book of Numbers. And that is a tremendously huge portion. And it's got so much very interesting information. So I'm going to move through this rather rapidly, pulling out some highlights to share with you. But I want to, first of all, I'm just going to read this little section regarding the zeal of Pinchas, or Phineas, your Bible might say. And that is from the book of Numbers chapter 25. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start right at the beginning of chapter 25, although the Torah portion doesn't start until chapter 25, verse 10. I'm going to back up and get a running head start into the whole story of Pinchas because it's only 9 verses. But then I'm going to make a few comments regarding some of the more poignant and important, all of it's important, but some of the things that stuck out to me in this section. And then Angela is I'm going to give you a bird's eye view, an overview of what's happening in this section. And then Angela is going to take a little bit to talk about weaving some of these elements together to see a deeper spiritual picture. And so, first I want to just read this section to you, and I'll leave this up on your screen just for this part of it, okay? So what I'm going to read from Numbers chapter 25, starting in verse 1. It says that while Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifice of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and Yehovah was angry against Israel. And Yehovah said to Moshe, "Take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before Yehovah, so that the fierce anger of Yehovah may turn away from Israel." So Moshe said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor." Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman, in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation and took a spear in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through the body. So the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. Now those who died by the plague were 24,000. Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, and this is where the Torah portion starts, "Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, in that he was jealous or zealous for my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, Behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. Now the name of the slain man of Israel who was slain with the Midianite woman was Zimri, the son of Salu, a leader of a father's household among the Simeonites. The name of the Midianite woman who was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur, who was head of the people of a father's household in Midian. Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, Be hostile to the Midianites, and strike them, for they have been hostile to you with their tricks, with which they have deceived you in the affair of Peor, and in the affair of Cosbi, the daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, who was slain on the day of the plague because of Peor. That is the little section that I wanted to read to you. And then here on this slide, it's a little bit crammed. I apologize for that. These are the main sections. We're going to have another census taken. We're going to have a section regarding the inheritance of females with the daughters of Zelophehad. We're going to have the commissioning of Yehoshua, that is Joshua, as a new leader after Moses. The instructions regarding offerings and Moedim, which will be reiterated for this new generation. The instruction regarding vows, both for men and women, but mostly for women. Taking vengeance on the Midianites. Fire and water purification, which I think is quite fascinating. The settlement of the Transjordan, that is the area across the Jordan River. And the cities of the Levites and cities of refuge and laws of murder. So that is a brief overview of what we are going to deal with so far. Now, I want to start with the census. Okay, so in the census, we had previously taken a census when the children of Israel left Egypt. And I don't know if you remember that number, but it was approximately 604,000 or something like that. And then now, approximately 40 years later, 38 to 39 years later, we're having a new census taken. And that is because we're dealing with a new group of people. The other Israelites, anyone from the age of 20 upwards, during the period of the spies giving their bad report of the land, had died in the wilderness. And so we're taking a new census. Now, the interesting thing is that it's not only interesting, it's an encouragement. In that, in this census, you know how many people less there are now of all the people, because of all the people who have died and all of the tragedy that has met the Israelites in the wilderness? There are now, their numbers have shrunk by 1,820 people. That's a lot of people, but it's really not a lot of people. When you consider a new generation being brought forth, and all of the people who had died in the plagues, to have a new generation come up, and these are men who are of fighting age, anywhere between the ages of approximately 20 to 55, perhaps. Those who had, made it through the wilderness, plus Caleb and Joshua. This new number represents, God being faithful, and we have only 1,820 people less. Does someone want to comment on that? No? Okay. I wanted to just bring your attention to this little idea, and I'm just going to leave this with you because I want you to maybe pay attention to this weekend. If you have some additional time, just make a note to yourself to look into which tribes gained people and which tribes lost people. You will see a couple of examples of a few of the tribes who lost a significant amount of people. I believe that it was Simeon who lost almost 46% of their tribal strength. Others, Manasseh went way up. Which is interesting. So there are some interesting little tidbits for you to take a look at there in seeing which tribes gained and which lost. So there's some interesting things to see there. Now, checking out the daughters of Zelophehad coming forward and saying, our father, Zelophehad, died in the wilderness, and he had no sons, but he did have these 5 daughters. It says in the text that he died for his own sins. He was not caught up in the rebellion of Korah or the leading men who rebelled against Moses and Aaron, and that it's interesting to me that God is very righteous and very just in that he is equitable. He is demonstrating his equanimity by granting property inheritance rights to these women. Now, we can't get carried away and say, there's total equality here, because there's definitely not. But you know and I know from having discussed on many occasions that women in the Bible are a strange breed. It's kind of hard to, you kind of look at it and you say that they're in many cases treated by God as special and precious creatures, but perhaps treated in the society as differently. Go ahead.
I think the differences have something to do with the woman that is married to the maker, and that it's not just a male-female thing. I mean, that's a very concrete way to look at it, but I think another way to look at it, I'll cover some things later that I think why it's different for women.
Yeah.
And that it benefits all of us.
Oh, good point. Good point. So God does grant the inheritance rights to the women, and it appears that what's going to happen here is then you'll get more information when you look at the end of the book of Numbers, where there is some other men from the tribes step forward and say, okay, this is fantastic that these women get to inherit the property of their father, but what happens if they marry a man from another tribe?
At the end of Numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say the land would transfer to another tribe.
Yeah.
And we can't have that because there's no transferring of property between tribes. Everything has to stay separate. And also remember from one of our other studies months ago that this land is not owned. There is no ownership going on here. The land is not owned by the Israelites. They are what we would call in the real estate industry tenants in perpetuity. They have legal rights to the land for occupancy, but not ownership. The land belongs to Yehovah, and he has granted them perpetual status to stay there and reside there, but he said, if you do not follow my instructions, the land will vomit you out, and you will be expunged from the land.
And remember what he just said.
Because that's going to become important for what she's going to talk about.
And I'm going to get a little abstract with it, and you need to remember what he just said.
So just remember that land must not transfer between the tribes, and that their husbands that they take must be from their own tribe. So that I believe when we studied the laws regarding Levirate marriage, both in the book of Ruth, I think was probably most prominent, was when if these gentlemen who were going to marry the daughters of Zelophehad would probably marry one of these girls, and then perhaps the firstborn son of that union would be given the name of her dead father Zelophehad, and that it would perpetuate their family line. Perhaps.
Even though he died in the wilderness for his own
Even
sins.
though he died in the wilderness for his own sins,
Yes.
which is another key point that you want to look at in regards to what Angela is going to talk about in a moment. Michael Marinos, good-looking boy. Good to see you, buddy. All right. Now, Joshua being appointed by Moshe. I want you to if you have an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into this section, I strongly encourage that you do so, and that you look at the most peculiar language when Moshe is told, you are going to die, and I want, come up, you're going to go up to the mountain, and you are going to die and be gathered to your people. What God said, or what Moshe said, this is in Numbers chapter 27, verse 16, when he says, hey, you're going to die. Moshe says, let Yehovah, the God of the spirits of all humankind, appoint a man over the community who will go out before them and who will come in before them. He's talking about Yehoshua being brought in as a new leader. And that language is quite fascinating. Angela will probably be talking about that as well.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me is that when God informs Moses that he is going to die and he is not going to inherit the promised land, his response is not to whine, to complain, to say, but. It is to say, the company of people need a new leader. They need leadership. And that continues to show us the humility and the humble attitude of Moshe in being more concerned with the interests of others than he is with his own self. Fascinating, fascinating discussion. But just remember, let Yuvah, the Spirit, the God of the spirits of all souls, appoint a man over the community. Was someone wanting to speak there? No?
What's the Hebrew word there?
Okay, yeah, you can look at that. So, interesting thing. Joshua is definitely a natural choice. It says that he had the Spirit of God in that same passage. He has the Spirit of God. He has been faithful to God in all of his experience. He's well known to the people. He seems like a natural choice. Now, interestingly, we have this incidence of semikah, and I know many of you have heard that word. It's not like you've seen in charismatic circles back in the day where people smack each other in the heads. Semikah is where you lay hands on someone, and you are in it. And this is interesting too, in that you see basically two things that happen in the Torah with semikah, the laying on of hands. One is the transfer of spiritual authority, and the other is the transfer of guilt, sin. You see, when they lay their hands on certain animals, most especially the goat, the one goat of Yom Kippur, when they lay their hands on the goat and essentially symbolically transfer the guilt of the unintended sins of the nation upon that goat. And here Moshe will lay his hands on Yehoshua to transfer symbolically to transfer his leadership for the people to see. I don't believe that there's a transfer of some type of spirit from Moses to him, because we've seen examples of that before when Moshe was confronted by a situation where the Israelites were rebelling, and he said, I can't handle all these people. And God said, well, gather 70 elders of the people, and we will transfer the spirit that is upon you to them. That's a different thing that's happening here. I think that this is primarily a symbolic transfer of leadership to Yehoshua.
The authority that was given.
The authority that was given, but not in the same way. And I think that this is some of the authority, yes. So what's interesting here is that you will see that, I don't see where this is, let's see. There's a section, in verse 21 of chapter 27, it says that he, that is Yehoshua, will stand before Eleazar the priest, who will seek counsel for him before Yuvah by the decision of the Urim. So we have clearly Moses, as a mediator of the covenant, is given direct revelation from God. And we've heard from God himself, who says, if I speak to a prophet or something, I speak in a vision or a dream darkly, but not so with my servant Moses. We speak to each other face to face, but not so with Moses. Now, Yehoshua will be granted leadership, but he will not hear from Yuvah face to face. He's going to basically be inquiring of Yuvah through the priesthood of Eleazar, using the Urim and the Tumim. And you can see that a lot of times.
He never gets word directly.
He very rarely, if ever, gets direct communication from Yuvah. Now, the angel of Yuvah does appear to Yehoshua in the book of Joshua. When he is about to invade the land, he's the guy with the sword, and he says, Are you for us or for them? So in a sense, you might say that was God communicating with him directly.
But not quite the same as Moses.
Not the same as Moses. So, and I don't know I'm not going to make conclusions for you in regards to that, but I say keep that in mind, as we all know that Yehoshua is a picture of the Messiah Yeshua, with some very big exceptions. Obviously, there are only two men in the history of the planet who are mediators of a covenant, and they hear directly from God. in all of its fullness. And one is Moses, and one is Yehoshua, our Messiah, Yeshua. Right? They hear directly from God.
What about Abraham?
Abraham? We don't know exactly. It seems...
There was a covenant, and he heard directly.
Well, he did, but you remember that some of the visions that he had visions and stuff like, where Moses shows us. Mm. Well, we also get the whole story of Abraham through Moses. So that's something to consider. But Moses tells us that he went into a deep sleep and saw visions, and God spoke to him. Sometimes he spoke to him in a dream. But we don't know exactly the clarity of the vision that was given to Abraham. But I would say no men are like Moshe and Yeshua the Messiah.
Sure.
They hear from God directly. They are like direct conduits of the will of God. Okay. So the direct communication of God with the children of Israel. And I think that this is such a beautiful metaphor, as you see in the book of Hebrews chapter 10, where Paul says these things were written for our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages have come. Hebrews.
How'd you get to Hebrews?
I just pulled it out of my noggin.
I got into Hebrews too.
So, if you've got Paul telling us that these things are written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come, then it's interesting to think about it this way. If these guys are hearing from Moses, and Moses is hearing directly from God at the beginning of the 40-year period in the wilderness, and then it's being limited at the end of the 40-year period in the wilderness, and then you start a new quote-unquote 40-year period in the wilderness, these 40 Jubilees, when we are in the wilderness, so to speak, of the nations over the last 2,000. That was after Yeshua.
Okay, yeah,
so then if the ends of the ages have come with the arrival of Yeshua, okay, and you have this outpouring of the Spirit and direct communication with Yeshua, but then it starts to die off. And direct communication with God is more limited.
Okay.
In the eons, millennia after Yeshua left the planet, to where we find ourselves today, where it's like, and we've had this conversation before, where's the Holy Spirit? Where's the power of the Spirit? People aren't really hearing from God, and I think I'm hearing from God, and I think God is speaking to me. Nobody is saying, as far as I know, God is speaking to me. If you are, talk to me later. And I don't mean to make a joke. Don't laugh, Mike. That is. I'm not making a joke of that. I'm simply stating a fact that in our modern world, especially in the West, there's a dearth of hearing from God in a certain way. But and I don't know what kind of weight to give these things. But you hear of people who are, let's say, missionaries in Asia or Muslim lands, where the Spirit of God purportedly is moving in a much stronger fashion. What do you make of that? That's a fascinating question in and of itself. I think that it has something to do with Western culture, but that's just my opinion. You can disregard that at your leisure. So, looking at this possible menorah pattern of the way that the Spirit is communicating through God to the people up until Yeshua, and then it starts to go perhaps the other direction. It's an interesting idea to play with. Think about it. You know that the next section deals with the offerings and the Moedim. It's like this new generation has to have these regulations regarding how to draw near to God through the sacrificial system and through the priesthood need to be reiterated. They are presented in much the same way that we've seen before in the book of Leviticus, although they are delineated slightly differently in a pretty orderly fashion. It's like somebody reorganized them a little bit to make them a little bit clearer. And then we also have the instructions regarding the Moedim, the Passover and Shavuot and all that stuff. So everybody's being reintroduced to these festivals, especially since they're going to be entering the land here shortly and are going to be able to start taking part of the Moedim more in their fullness, with being in the land and bringing the actual produce of the land and stuff like that. So things are about to be a little bit different. just to make sure that this new generation is intimately familiar with what is about to happen here. Now, we have the vows of the woman, which is this section, and I'm going to touch on this lightly because I think Angela's going to deal with this a little bit more.
No, not hugely. Just
I think that there's some interesting spiritual pictures going on here where a man, it is told to us at the beginning of this section, a man who makes a vow must observe the vow regardless.
Period.
Come hell or high water, end of story, you keep your vows. And Yeshua did not tell us anything differently in the New Testament. He said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He was not saying don't make vows. He was saying you better keep your vows. It'd be better to not make a vow at all than to make a vow and not keep it. So to be safe, because I know how you guys are, just be a person who says yes or a person who says no. Yes or no. Just say yes or no. Don't say, oh, yes, I will do that. I swear on this and that and the other thing.
Well, because they were swearing by the...
Well, they were swearing by the temple and all this other stuff, the gold in the temple. Yeah, you can see some of these discussions happening. But I think, personally, a person who needs to vow is a person who's not to be trusted. That's just my opinion. I like men and women who say, yes, I will, and they do.
Yeah.
And a man who says, I will do that, and they do. Kevin, go ahead, buddy.
Somebody says, I swear.
Yeah.
What is a vow?
A vow is simply, well, there are a couple of different things here. There are two things, basically. There is a vow and an oath. Now, we do swear oaths when we get married, for example. But a vow oftentimes is interpreted as, if let's say that you find yourself in a pickle, and I think even atheists find themselves in this situation on occasion where their life might be in jeopardy or in serious trouble, and they will reach out to God and say, if you will deliver me from this affliction, then I will blah, blah, blah. And you've heard that story so many times. That is a vow.
And then bind...
Sorry, like a promise?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Bind yourself to an obligation.
Yes, exactly. And then, so that would be a vow.
Well, there's a vow, and then there's binding yourself to an obligation.
So that would be like an oath.
Yeah, like I will do this,
Right.
like a promise.
And I think that's mostly related easily for us to see in the vows of marriage,
Yes.
where I promise
say.
to,
You're saying
uphold.
a promise is more of an oath.
I would say so, yes. And a vow.
Is that the second one listed?
Yes.
A vow and an oath. Yeah, an oath
Yeah.
is more like a promise.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you, Kevin. That's a great question. Yes, Mikey?
Sorry, I'm still saying.
Oh, please, go ahead.
No, so a vow then is more like I will do something and then not do it.
That's the second one.
I think that would be the oath.
Well, they call them marriage vows, and you say,
Yeah, but
you say,
that's-
person, will you promise to do this?
That's a language we use.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I got you. So there's a little bit of overlap in those terms, but you see if you look at those two Hebrew terms throughout the Torah, you will see some overlap, but also some differences. And I think that's a side study that you want to do, just because I didn't have time to really dig into this as far as I would have liked. But Mike, do you have a question? Go on with that.
Yeah, I think if we look at the word picture for that Hebrew word vow, the word is neder. It's yud, the Latin, and resh, which is life at the door of the Most High. So if you think about making a vow to the Creator, it's like it's your being, it's your life that you're putting out that door.
Right.
Kind of like you making a covenant with him.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great insight, Mikey. Did you guys, I don't know if you heard that, but Mikey's talking about it's like making a vow that is like approaching the door. What did you say, Mike?
Yeah, the word picture is life at the door of the Most High.
Yes.
Those are the Hebrew letters. Now,
And you can see some wonderful insights right there. That's a good insight.
And they call that word like a vow or a promise.
Yes, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. So I would just take a look at what's that, Keith?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, haven't we all made the vows? Aren't we in the marriage covenant with Yeshua?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I say so. If you are professing to be a believer in the Messiah Yeshua and you are taking for yourself his atoning sacrifice, absolutely. Yeah.
So just like Mike was saying, we are at that door. Our lives are at that door, and the Father is there watching us.
Yes, especially since Yeshua is the door of the sheep, and we are sheep. Yeah, that's a great insight. Great insight. So these promises, these vows, a real simple way to look at it would be a promise to do or a promise to not do something. That is just the most basic form of looking at this. And Yeshua didn't do away with vows. He simply warned against not fulfilling them. A man is always responsible for his vows, but it gets real interesting when you come into this section regarding an unmarried girl or a married woman. Basically having, if a woman who is married or a woman who is still under the headship of her father, that's a different story. Carla?
I'm getting really a lot of feedback.
I think it might be this. See if this fixes it.
Look, Angela's taking a look at something. She's going to see if that helps. Let me know if did it go away?
I think
Yeah.
someone.
Okay.
It was
Sorry
just
about that.
whistling.
That might have been her.
Sorry.
So, yeah, I was saying that. Did you want to say something about that, Carla, or were you just pointing out the noise? Just the noise? Okay. So this unmarried girl or this married woman is essentially, I suppose, what you would say under the headship of either a father or a husband. And if they make a vow, then the husband or the father can annul that vow. They have the authority, so to speak, to annul that vow. And you might look at that in a fairly mundane way and make some sexist comment about a woman, needing to be covered by that. I don't think that's the way we're supposed to take it. I think there's a much deeper spiritual picture, and I believe Angela will go there. So I'm not going to spend much time delving into that, because Angela's going to delve into that. But just wanted to bring it to your attention. And also note, just another little tidbit here, that the father or husband who does annul a vow for a woman who is a daughter or a married woman bears some responsibility regarding that. So consider that as Angela begins to talk. Was someone else going to speak? Kevin? I can. Well, I could hear you, Jimbo, but it seems like you've got two computers going there, and they're feeding back to each other.
Mute one.
I've got two signed in here. You're signed in as James and Jan. Can you sign out of James? Come back to me after you've done that and try it again and see what happens. Was that just Jimbo who was going to talk, or Kevin? You go ahead while we're waiting for Jimbo to come back on.
I don't want to harp on it too long. Is there any difference in the severity between a vow and an oath?
That's a great
They
question.
seem combined.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that off the top of my head. I don't know if one is given more spiritual weight, perhaps. It's a good question, though.
So I looked through some other passages that have an oath. I was just trying to see if there's a distinction between who's taking an oath and who's taking a vow. Vow seems more to be a promise, and an oath is more like you swear, or you're swearing to do something. So I just wondered if there's any severity.
Yeah, that is certainly possible, and I would say
An oath seems to be more formal, I guess.
yeah, I would say that's certainly possible. Yeah. So I'm gonna move on from that. Angela's gonna delve deeper.
Yeah, I don't know
going
what
to delve
to do
deeper
with
into that a little
but
bit more.
Yeah, I've got something, but it doesn't address that.
Okay. Now, the next section is about vengeance on the Midianites and for the guilt of aligning themselves with Moab against the Israelites and seducing the people to other gods. Now, this whole thing about the Midianites and the Moabites combining forces to lure the Israelites into some type of transgression is quite instructive, and I'd say very, very prophetic, because you see Balaam, this idea about Balaam is brought up again in the book of the Revelation of the Messiah Yeshua in chapter 2, and it's brought up by Peter and also by Jude, I believe. It's a very popular thing in the Bible to talk about this thing, and it has to do with drawing the people away from God through idolatry and sexual immorality and food, which is quite fascinating because we're right back to Acts chapter 15. We keep going there. It just keeps popping up over and over and over. That the people were sucked away into sexual immorality by these feasts being put together by these attractive Midianite females who lured the men of Israel away from their God and into licentiousness through food, sexuality, and idolatry, which is going right back to Acts chapter 15. And this is, unfortunately, this incident really brings to your attention that these Israelites are not just a little closed society who are wandering through the wilderness, not interacting with other people around them. I mean, if they're getting together for some parties with these Midianites, they're interacting with some of the people around them. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have thought about that before. You know, it's a couple of million people. They need things. God is supplying a good amount of their needs, but of course they probably are trading with other little people groups around them, and apparently they have begun to fraternize with the enemy. And I think that is instructive for us as well on so many levels of being lured away from the pure worship of our God through sexual immorality, idolatry, and food.
Yeah, and I think those things are pictures of maybe something even more, not just those concrete things of actual food. And
no, I totally agree.
But what you consume, what you put into you. It's supposed to be His words, and who you join yourself to. Yes,
joining themselves to Baal Peor is you look at that, mark that Hebrew word where it says joined to. They joined themselves to Baal Peor. Look up that word. It's quite fascinating. It's something to look into. And then he's saying he's instructing them to basically destroy the Midianites. Now, people ask that are these Midianites? Do they kill all the Midianites? No, obviously not. They do not, because we see the Midianites later on in the histories of Israel. This is more likely that we are seeing this particular clan or group of tribes of the Midianites who have aligned themselves with the Moabites. The Israelites are not going back towards the Sinai Peninsula over in the western edge of Saudi Arabia to harass the main bulk of the Midianites who live there. This group or tribes have probably sent delegations and some people who are working in conjunction with the Moabites to try to bring the Israelites down. That people group was apparently thoroughly destroyed. All of the males are killed, and all of the females who had some type of sexual relationship with a man have been killed. The only people who survive that are young girls who have not had sexual experience, who have not joined themselves to some kind of a sexual ritual act through the worship of Baal Peor. And so, interesting thing here, also Balaam is killed in this raid that is quite interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one is that this is a spiritual battle. This is one of the first instances of the law of Cherem brought together, where you see this is the ban, when Joshua goes into the land, and God tells him there are certain tribes in that area when you get into Canaan that you are to completely destroy. You must kill everyone and destroy everything. And that Hebrew word to describe that is cherem. It is under the ban. And anyone who touches it or tries to take any of those items that are supposed to be destroyed, you can see great punishment coming upon them. This is the first instance of that. You also see in this instance where the priest goes out before them in battle. They take holy instruments with them, some trumpets. They may have even brought the Ark of the Covenant into the battle. But then there's quite an interesting thing here. He gives them instructions regarding things that can be purified. Of the things that remain of the Moabites, we have instructions given regarding anything that can pass through the fire must be passed through the fire to be purified. Anything that cannot withstand the fire must be passed through the water to be purified. Now that is an amazing spiritual picture, because if you think about that in a more metaphysical way, you're seeing what can be passed through the fire. The cleansing fires of Yehovah. And this is reminding me of a passage from one of the books that Paul wrote. I believe it's Corinthians, where he says, if anyone is building with wood, straw, hay, stubble, or precious stones and gold and silver and such, those works of yours are going to be passed through the fire to see what stands up. Obviously, the things that you built with wood, hay, straw, and stubble do not withstand the fire, and they will be burned up. But what can withstand, in the spiritual sense, passing through the fire? It's the human soul. It's the human spirit. The purifying power of the flames, the purifying flames of God purify the human soul. And what purifies the flesh? Baptism. The sprinkling of water. Just interesting ideas to contemplate there. Being purified by the water of the Word, if you want to spiritualize it in that way as well. That there's the washing of the water of the Word from the book of John, where Peter is talking with Yeshua about it. And you are clean because of the Word that I have spoken to you. So, interesting metaphors there being exchanged regarding passing through the fire and passing through the water. Just keep that in mind. And then I'm going to say the Transjordan is occupied by the tribes of Reuben and Gad, and then later on it appears half of the tribe of Manasseh go over to that side of the Jordan and decide to take their inheritance there. They are confused. They are, I would say, in a spiritual sense, you need to look at those tribes who settled on the other side of the Jordan River. They decided for themselves, we really don't want to enter the Promised Land. We're content to be on that side of the Jordan River. And I think it is demonstrated by a couple of things. Number one, later on in history you can see that those tribes on the other side of the Jordan River were the first to be conquered and destroyed by enemies. Number one. Number two, they say to Moses, man, we're going to stay over here and build sheepfolds and cities for our little ones and our wives. Do you notice that that's backwards? They were more interested in their sheep than they were their wives and their children. And Moses, when he finally said, whoa, what are you talking about? You can't, no, you guys ain't bowing out. They said, no, we didn't mean that. I think they might have. But they all of a sudden said, no, we didn't mean that. We're going to go over and fight with the other Israelites, but then we're going to come back. And Moses said, okay, that's fine. You do that, and then you can, first you go and build cities for your wives and children. Then pens for your animals. They had it completely backwards. I think they were worldly, and they were not willing to enter into the land. They were not dedicated to entering in with their brothers. Now, you can spiritualize that any number of ways, and there's some interesting conclusions to be drawn from that. And then we have the Levitical cities. The Levites, remember, are not given land in the Promised Land. They are only given cities, and they have a job to do, which is to instruct in the Torah, and they have small farms to sustain them, along with their tithes and offerings that they get as income. It is said by researchers that no Israelite probably lived more than 10 miles from any Levite town. So they had direct access. And of course you have 6 of these Levitical townships were designated as cities of refuge. And that's a fascinating discussion all by itself. So that 3 of the Levite cities on the east side of the Jordan River were cities of refuge. And then 3 of the cities on the west side of the Jordan River were cities of refuge, where the manslayer could go to escape the avenger of blood. So many amazing pictures here. And I'm sorry that I had to give it such a cursory examination because there's just so much of it. And Angela has some fascinating things to say.
About some of it.
And about a good deal of it. And I want to kind of back down now for a little bit and have Angela share some of the insights that she has gleaned over this period of time. Do you need the slides, Angela?
I do, but not yet. See in my notes where it says where the slide needs to be.
Okay, do you want them to see the slides?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, when it says slide, that's when they need to see the
you
slide. Because I wanted to talk to them.
I gotcha. Okay.
You know.
So she's going to tell me when
I'm
to turn
going
the
to try to talk
slides
to you and not just have slides. Because you know me, I can go with 110 slides, but not tonight. I only have like 15.
Don't lie. There's more.
All right. So.
Okay.
This whole section is about inheritance. And what inheritance? The inheritance, the promise made to Abraham 600, 700, 800 years earlier. It's about to happen. And what are the 3 components of this promise, the things that we hear over and over again that he said? It's the descendants like the stars of the sky, descendants like the dust of the earth. Remember that? And the land. Okay? Those are the components of this promise. And Israel's right at the edge of the fulfillment of a promise. A fulfillment of this promise. Sorry. I suspect that we too are right on the brink of an even greater fulfillment of this promise. Because you know how prophecy can be fulfilled multiple times and the scope of it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So when as we study these events, we need to consider how informative they can be to us at this time in history where we are. And we need to review the scope of history as it applies to this promise made to Abraham and how we fit into that
paradigm.
Yeah, that timeline or okay. So, and if you'll notice, a big part of chapter 33 in Numbers is a review of the 42 stations or resting places, stopping places. And so right there at the end of Numbers, he's let's back up. Let's review. This is where we've been. And so he goes through all the places where they've stopped along the way in the wilderness before they're about to enter the land. So I want to start with chapter 26 just briefly and then move backwards into chapter 25. In chapter 26, that's where we saw the census taken. And there is a chiasm. Hey, I need you. I don't know how to switch to show the slide. It's time.
The slide now?
Yeah, get over here. He's a slacker. Look at him.
Sorry.
Stepping out.
Sorry about that. Okay, so if you want to share a slide, we're just going to present the Chrome tab.
I'm not going to remember that.
Yeah,
you need to be here.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so we're ready for the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a chiasm in the census.
There it is.
Okay. In verses 1 through 65. Okay. In the first part of this is a huge section. In the first part, you see this phrase, the plains of Moab along the Jericho stretch of the Jordan. And at the end of this, you see that phrase again. And that's always a clue. You know what? I just said chiasm, and is it Kevin?
Yeah.
I'm not sure Kevin knows what I'm talking about. I might need to explain that.
Sure, yeah.
Kevin, do you... Sorry.
Sure. If you want to explain it, that'd be great.
Okay, a chiasm is a literary structure that we find often in the Torah. It's like a word menorah. When you see something said and then later you see it said again, it's a clue that, you know how the menorah has the branches that go out and the two are connected. So when you see in the reading, plains of Moab along the stretch of the Jericho, and then later he says the same phrase again, it's a clue that you have these two. He can't see me.
I can see you.
Oh, it's a clue that you have these two ideas that are connected. And just like in the menorah, you're going to find a series of ideas that are connected, and then in the center, just like at the menorah, where the center branch is the servant, it's the main idea, it's what everything else is connected to. It's the same thing with the way that this story is structured, that he does this in here. And I think it's almost like a Bible study guide from God with the way he arranged things, that all of these ideas that you see here and here, or here and here, and then here and here, and then here, they're connected to that center idea. And so when you see that kind of repetition, look for what's in the middle, because that might explain or help to inform you on the stuff that's connected to it. So in this story about the census, you have the plain, where they are located in the plains. You have, if you move in from there, should I go this way? Move in from there, you have the registering of the 12 tribes, and then over here you have the registering of the Levites. So you have the nation, and you have the priests, the people and the priests. And then in the center of that is the command for distributing the land. Alan?
Yes?
You're a slacker.
I let Beavis into the office.
All right. Where did Bubby go?
He's right there.
All right. Keep an eye on him.
Do you need my help?
Yeah, I need you to switch it.
Oh.
You need to...
Go ahead, there's the next one.
No, I don't need the next one. I want to talk to them.
They can still see you.
Oh.
Yeah, they're still seeing you.
Can they see the slide, though?
They can see the slide and you.
Wow, okay. All right. So the center of that, you go back. I'm not done with that other one.
There you go.
The center of that was the command to distribute the land. And what I wanted to point out about the way the land was distributed is that the more people that were in the tribe, the bigger the amount of land allotted to that tribe. And I want you to, we're going to get just a little abstract here. I want you to consider how often that land, dirt, or ground is tied to man in the human body. Like Adam, it's what he's made of. It's what he's named after. In the promise to Abraham, he says, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. And then when we get to Yeshua, and these are just a few examples, he tells the parable about the seed and the types of soil. And we are the different types of soil. In the future, as you read, consider there might be a connection about, and I'm just throwing this out there, maybe you'll see it, maybe not, I don't know. I'm going to just kind of keep it in the back of my mind as I'm reading. There may be a connection between being outside of the land or inside of the land. Those two concepts might be connected to being in the corrupted body or the perfected body. The wilderness, the field, the world, it's not good. And then being in the land has this eternal component attached to, or in the land has an eternal component attached to it. So here in later when it speaks about conquering the land and not and how to dwell in the land, and how to not defile the land, consider that these instructions for conquering, dwelling in, and not defiling also apply to you in your land that your soul is inhabiting. So here in the distribution of the land, we see that the amount of dust given to each tribe is directly proportionate to the number of souls in that tribe. Second slide. Now I want to back up and look at the...
Do you need a new slide?
Yeah. Look at the Baal Peor Phineas incident, because this too contains a chiasm, and it should be up on your screen. Okay. In the story of Phineas, you have the same thing happening. You have... Where'd it go?
Oh, Alan, can you hear me?
You're feeding back, Jimbo. Sorry about that. You might need to just call in. Just terminate your audio on the call and then just pick up your phone and call that number. Like you can communicate with us that way. Sorry, go ahead, Angela.
All right, we're on to the next slide where we have the Baal Peor chiasm. Okay, so first we have a betrayal where they join themselves. Then there's the command to kill the people that have been joined to Baal Peor. Then Phineas kills 2 people. And then we have the covenant of peace. He's given an everlasting priesthood. That's in the center of these events. Moving out from there, almost like a mirror, instead of Phineas kills 2 persons, it's the names of the 2 persons killed by Phineas. And then if we back out from there, we have the command to kill the Midianites. Or it says be hostile and strike, which I think infers that eventually, they're going to go down by the end of the book. And then if we back out from there, we have, when it is restating the names of the 2 people that were killed, it says because they used trickery and deceit. And then it mentions Cosby, the woman's name again, which actually means deceiver. So that is our mirror to deception, or betrayal. Betrayal, deception are our bookends for that menorah pattern that we see. So I want to explore in a little more depth the covenant of peace that is given to Phineas and his descendants, that they have inherited here. Because remember, this whole thing is about inheritance. So in terms of inheritance, this is a pretty big deal. First of all, this contains one of those textual anomalies that are always so puzzling, fascinating. The Hebrew words for covenant of peace are Brit Shalom. And when you see this in a Torah scroll, the shalom is the peace word. When you see that word shalom in this story right here, this is what it looks like. Okay, shalom is the shin. We're moving from the right to left. The shin, the lamed, the vav, and the mem, the final mem. But look at the vav. It's not supposed to have that break in it. It's supposed to be connected, that top and bottom. Okay, and this vav is broken like this in every Torah scroll that you'll see. Now, normally, if a letter is not perfect and it has something like that, that would invalidate your Torah scroll. But in the case of this particular letter, it has to be broken or the Torah scroll is invalid. Okay, so this one has to be broken, only this one. So why is this broken letter part of a perfect Torah scroll? There's probably a lot of things embedded in that, but I want us to just consider one avenue. The letter Vav, the letter that's broken here, is the letter that's used in the Hebrew language to join things together. If you want to say and, like this and this, and put them together, you use a Vav for that. It's also used, and I just found this out recently, to change past tense into future tense, or perfect into imperfect, or future tense into past tense. So there's like this bounce back. It's almost like a time traveler type of letter. So Vav is also the letter used for the number 6, because there's no numbers in Hebrew. So Vav also means 6, which is the number of man. And Vav, this letter, is a picture of a tent peg, like the tent pegs that are used to fasten the tabernacle to the ground. There's a whole bunch of them all around the tabernacle.
remember, the tabernacle was patterned after what Moses was shown in the heavenly realm. The tent pegs join that heavenly pattern to the earth, the ground. Those tent pegs make me think of Yeshua, because it's the heavenly joined to the earth, like God in flesh. He's our intercessor. He's our joiner. He's the thing that connects it. So Phinehas receives this covenant of peace. He receives an everlasting priesthood because, and this is what it says, the reason why he was given this, is because he zealously defended the honor of Yehovah and made atonement for the children of Israel. Can you go back to the slide? Is there a next one? Those are the reasons right there. So when you look at those reasons, go back. When you look at those reasons, who do you think of? When I see the broken vav here in this story, I am reminded of on the night he was betrayed, he took bread and broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you." We have an eternal priesthood. And when he said this is my body, this is at the Last Supper or whatever it was.
Last Passover, whatever.
He has just defended the honor of his father, and he is about to make atonement for mankind. So you have this in the middle of those two things. So let's look at Phinehas and Yeshua side by side in the next slide. There it is. Did you animate that for me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay. Phinehas and Yeshua. Phinehas stopped the plague, and Yeshua also stopped the plague, the big one, death. Phinehas was given an everlasting priesthood. We see the same thing with Yeshua. Phinehas made atonement for the Israelites. Yeshua made atonement for mankind. Now, in Phinehas, we have a righteous man who pierced a wicked man. With Yeshua, we have a righteous man pierced by a wicked man. And it's interesting, the wording here for Phinehas. It says, in the sight of the congregation, while the people were weeping at the doorway of the tabernacle. And if you look in Zechariah, there's a verse about when Yeshua comes back and says, they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will weep bitterly. So I think these two things are, it's highly probable that these are connected. Mm-hmm. So now, before you show them the next slide, I want to tell them, remember.
Hold on. Angela, Tracy would like to speak.
Oh, all right. Go ahead, Tracy. What do you got?
What? I just want to know what verse that was, the Phineas one, and the sight of the congregation while people were weeping.
I don't have it.
That I will give you that. That is in chapter 25. And that is in verse 6. 25, verse 6.
When the Israelite man brings his Midianite woman in, it's in front of, and it lists it says Moses and the whole congregation.
Yep, that's in chapter 25, verse 6.
Okay. And then that corresponding verse in Zechariah 12 is also when he says, I will pour out upon the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, which is another extra Messiah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So now there's an obvious difference. I don't know if you picked up on it, if anyone wanted to bring it up, but Phinehas pierced two people. He pierced a man and a woman. Yeshua was one man who was pierced. So we have a difference in the number of people here. But was there a pierced woman in the events surrounding Yeshua's piercing?
Oh.
Do you remember when... Shh, let me tell.
Oh, look. Jimmy got it.
All right. Do you remember... Jimmy, shh. Do you remember when, after Mary gave birth, she took Yeshua up to the temple to do the purification sacrifice of the two pigeons, doves, whatever they were. Okay. There was a man there who had been told, you won't die until you see the Messiah. And when she came up, he took the baby in his arms and he said, he gave like a prophecy, kind of a prophecy. It's a beautiful little spoken thing that he says, but then he turns and he says to Mary, it says that he says this to her, he says a sentence. And interestingly enough, this sentence is broken in half. Right in the middle of the sentence is this weird little thing. It's almost like he was saying something and then blurted something out and then finished what he was saying. Let's read. Slide.
Oh, slide.
Let's read what he said. He said, "Behold, this child is appointed." He's saying this to Mary. "Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel and for a sign to be opposed. And a sword will pierce even your soul, to the end that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed." And remember, the man who was pierced by Phinehas was a leader of the tribe of the Simeonites? Mm-hmm. This guy who just said this to Mary, his name is? Simeon. Interesting.
Yeah.
Even the story of Phinehas was broken into. Remember, we finished our Torah portion last week with the first part?
That's right.
There's a thing about broken.
There was. It's interesting that the rabbis have often puzzled, later rabbis wondered, why did the earliest rabbis cut the story of Phinehas in half? Which is quite interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Now, not yet. This is not the only place in the Bible where we find this covenant of peace. And I want to just pick at this covenant of peace a little bit, and then the other stuff that I cover, since it's 8:21, will have to be fast.
Yeah, okay, you got about 30 or 40 minutes.
Yeah, okay. There are 3 other places where there is a covenant of peace. So, remember those 42 stops in the wilderness? It's like a historical review. Here's where we've come and been. And these 4 covenants of peace also hint at the same kind of historical review. Not just a review, but a preview, because they go from Abraham all the way to the millennial kingdom. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's look at the other 3. Next slide. This is the next time covenant of peace shows up. It's in Isaiah 54. And here there's this figurative language of a desolate, barren, childless woman whose sons will be more numerous than the sons of the married woman. Her descendants will possess the nations. It says her husband is her maker. Yehovah is his name. He says to her, for a brief moment, I'm paraphrasing, this is an entire chapter and I've only pulled out some pieces. You are welcome to go and read it word for word and parse that whole thing. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to hit on some highlights. He says to her, for a brief moment I forsook you, but with great compassion I will gather you. For the mountains may be removed and the hills may shake. My covenant of peace will not be shaken. This is the inheritance to the servants of Yehovah, and their vindication is from me. So, some questions. Who is this woman?
The nation.
What nation?
Of Israel.
Okay, and when was she married? Her husband is her maker.
At the covenant of Sinai.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's look at the next one.
All right.
Okay, the next time you see covenant of peace is in Ezekiel chapter 34, and I've done the same thing again. I've pulled out some pieces. There's a lot more I wanted to put on here, but I'm just hitting the highlights, and hopefully it'll be enough of a teaser to get you reading these chapters maybe this week. He says, woe to the shepherds who are not feeding the flock, and he spends a great deal of this chapter talking about those shepherds. And then he says, I myself will search for my sheep, because they've been scattered. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and bring them to their own land. Then I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David, and my servant David will be prince among them. Remember that. And I will make a covenant of peace with them. And then he goes on to describe how things are going to be so much better. Eliminate the harmful beasts, live securely, showers of blessings, the trees yield their fruit, the earth yields its increase, no longer a prey to the nations. Some really good stuff there. So the questions about this is, who is the flock?
The nation of Israel.
Yeah.
You want to qualify that?
No. When were they scattered?
They were scattered. Well, there's been 2 exiles, 3 if you want to count the separate nation of Israel, and then the separate kingdom of Judah.
When were they gathered from the countries?
They haven't been.
Kind of in process, right?
It's in the process of happening now,
All right.
I would say.
So then who is my servant David in this?
I would say that's a prophetic shadow picture of the descendant of David, the Messiah Yeshua.
When does, or...
Hold on, who wants to talk?
I want to say something.
You go.
I think we are the flock right now, and there'll be a second gathering when he comes back, which I've been doing a lot of study on. So there is a spiritual gathering right now, and when he returns, a greater host of his original people will recognize him, and then there will be another gathering. So there's I think a twofold to this.
Just like there was twofold to the scattering.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Angela. Yeah.
So,
Because so as you said before, the land is sort of our bodies right now, and it's a spiritual inside the body and outside the body. So I do see that.
Yeah, and I think you're going to pick up more from that, Marie, in just a few minutes, because she's going to go deeper into that. And it's right down the alley of what you and I have discussed before.
There are different groups.
Yep, absolutely.
So, when did this servant David become their shepherd?
Keith here.
Yeah?
Go, Keith.
Yes, when Yeshua came, he is the servant.
Absolutely.
Yep, and he's the shepherd. And here...
Yes, he's both.
Yeah, and it describes him also as prince among them. Not over them, among them, which to me is among, within. And then it also says that they, the flock, will know that he is their God. And we know the shepherd's voice, right? We know. Okay, so this is kind of related to where we're at. I think we're in some kind of process here. I don't know exactly where, but it's helping me place myself in history. Let's look at the next one. Okay, the next covenant of peace is in Ezekiel 37. And I have 2 slides for this. Ezekiel 37 starts with the valley of dry bones, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with. He says, "Behold, I will open your graves, cause you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you to the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am your God." Next slide. Then it goes right into the prophecy about the 2 sticks, Judah and
Israel.
Ephraim, Joseph. Okay. He says they'll no longer be 2 nations, no longer divided into 2 kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols or with their detestable things or with any of their transgressions, but I will deliver them from their dwelling places in which they have sinned and will cleanse them. Then they shall live on the land I gave to Jacob my servant. David my servant shall be their prince forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant. I will place them. I will multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in their midst forever. And then the nations will know that I am God. And that is a paraphrase summary, pulling just little tiny pieces out. But okay, so let's look at these things side by side. I have lost my place. Hold on. Okay. The first covenant, the Phineas one, it was made with one man and his descendants, like the covenant with Abraham. That's where we start our journey.
Do you have a slide for this?
No. Okay. The next one is made with a woman who are the servants of Yehovah, whose husband is Yehovah when they got married at the mountain. And the covenant of peace that she receives is after she is forsaken and exiled, gathered, and it's her heritage. Now, the third covenant of peace is made with a flock. And these are gathered from the countries with a shepherd set over them.
Now, would you say
a prince among them, and the flock knows.
You have said the first, second, and third covenants of peace.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the same covenant of peace just becoming more and more full over time, or are we talking about three separate things?
Well, I don't know, because this one is, the covenant with Phineas is an eternal priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
That's, or maybe those are two separate things.
Okay.
Maybe that was something separate.
No, it's all very mysterious, but it's all
Yeah.
very much tied together too in some ways, for
Okay,
sure.
let me
Go ahead,
finish,
sorry,
because
sorry.
in this last one, he was a shepherd over them and a prince among them, and the flock knew that God was God.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, after being brought out of their graves and brought into the land and united, we have our last covenant, and now the servant David, his servant David the king is king over them,
Mm-hmm.
and now the nations know. Mm-hmm. So I think that has not happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely in the future. Comments?
Yeah,
I got a break
comments,
here.
questions, or concerns?
Well, are you going to talk about the one in Malachi?
Nope.
Okay, well that one, that covenant of peace in Malachi 2:5-7, I think it is I think he's speaking to the Levites, so that's like with the covenant of peace was with him, the law was on his lips, the people sought my Torah from him. So there could be some kind of relation to this covenant of peace to the priesthood, because we are supposed to be like priests at some point, so there could be some kind of relationship to that.
Yep. Any other comments? I know this is a little. We're digging a little deep here, but it's mysterious, and we can't.
We're coming up for air now.
Yeah, we can't answer all the questions. Just noting for your further study to dig a little bit deeper into these, because they're pretty deep stuff.
All right, next slide.
Okay.
In chapter 27, we met the 5 daughters of Zelophehad. And in this chapter, we have an AB pattern, which we see happening too. It helps us to compare things. First of all, it says the daughters came up in the presence of the whole community or congregation. And then they made their request about the inheritance because their father had died. And yes.
Sorry, you mentioned this is an AB. You say AB.
Yes, we're going to have.
The chiasm, and then this is what?
This is not a chiasm. This is just an AB pattern where you have something else, and then. Right. And I tried to stagger it so that you'd see how they relate to each other. So first you have them in the presence of the whole community, and then you have them make their request. And then you have Moses bring their case before the presence of the Lord, and then their request is accepted. So you have in the presence of the community, then you have their request in the presence of the Lord, and you have the request of the daughters, and you have the acceptance of the request. And this, because there's 5 daughters, and the way this AB pattern kind of highlighted some things for me that I had not considered, I put this up against the 5 virgins, or the 10 virgins, the parable of the 10 virgins, because at the beginning of the parable, all 10 are together. It's the whole group, like all the congregation in the 5 daughters, and then these only 5 of those virgins made preparations ahead of time, and that's what these 5 daughters are doing. They're making preparations. They're not in the land yet. They're making preparations now for their inheritance when they get to the land. And then for the virgins, when the bridegroom arrives, they're able to go into the presence of the bridegroom. And then that portion of the daughters was their request going into the presence. Moses took their request into the presence of Jehovah. And the 5 virgins receive their inheritance. They're with the bridegroom now. And another thing to consider here with these is this laws of inheritance thing was, I think you mentioned it, the story of Ruth and Boaz, because these inheritance laws that are outlined here are, I think they've got to be the ones that they were following with Ruth and Boaz. And interestingly enough, Ruth is a
Moabitess.
Moabitess.
That's right.
No, because she now she's an Israelite.
She's an Israelite. She's
But
grafted into
that
Israel.
says something about being.
It does.
And
Say something about kicking your inheritance to the curb and adopting
a new better
people.
promise.
That's right.
Okay, and then the next one.
Next what?
The next slide.
The next slide,
We're trucking
okay.
along now. All right, this one is an AB pattern again, and this was where Joshua was named as successor. You had the command of the Lord to Moses. He said, "Go view the land," and this is where he reiterates the reason why you are not going in. And then you have some words of Moses. And then you have some words of the Lord. You have the command of the Lord to select Joshua. And then you have Moses acting and doing just as the Lord commanded. So you have the command of the Lord, view the land, words of Moses, the command of the Lord, select Joshua, the acts of Moses. And I think, if you'll go to the next slide. Whoa, that's not right. They're supposed to be on top of each other.
Huh?
Yeah, those, I lined it up so that those would follow underneath so I could talk about, like that. Yeah. Okay, so the command of the Lord to view the land. You know, Abraham never actually, he was in the land and he kind of sojourned through it, but he didn't occupy it or rule in it. In fact, he's told, I will give you the land, but first your descendants are going to go down into a country that is not theirs. They will be there for a while, and then I will bring them out, and I will return them here. And then he gives them some kind of real general borders of this land that he's talking about. And so that was your view the land in history. And then you have words of Moses, these words that he says. And that's like Torah, Mount Sinai, our next phase of our history that we keep seeing repeated over and over again. And then you have the command of the Lord to select Joshua, and that's like our Yeshua phase of history. And then you have the acts of Moses, because we're supposed to do now, not just have Moses' words, but we're supposed to do it. And in Romans, Paul says, "For not the hearers of the Torah are righteous in the sight of Elohim, but the doers of the Torah shall be declared right." Okay,
Okay, what?
the next one.
Oh, next slide.
We're flying along, getting through it.
Did anybody have any questions in regard to that? Okay. Are you raising your hand, Wayne?
I have a million questions, but I'll refrain.
No, just adjusting my camera.
Oh, okay. Well, Kevin, if you want to bring something up, feel free, buddy.
No, it kind of goes off topic too much, so I'm good.
Too many questions. I got you. That's okay. You and I can talk offline. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I think it's this one.
Yeah, I was going to look at exactly what he said here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to point out again that he said, "The Lord, the God, the spirits of all flesh," because that's a weird, kind of unusual thing to say. But go on to the next slide.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm going to skip that.
Okay.
The war against Midian. Here we have another chiasm. Okay? And in the center of it is the command about purification. So we start with 12,000 men armed for war, 1,000 from each tribe. And then we have them taking the booty. And then we have the command about the booty. And then we have the command about purification. That what can pass through the fire, what can pass through the fire, put through the fire, what can pass through water, what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Then we have another command about the booty. Then we have the distribution of the booty. And then at the end we have not one is missing of the 12,000 that went at the beginning of that. So I just want to make a couple observations about the war with Midian and some things that you can consider or look at or whatever. That 12,000 were sent, 1,000 from each tribe. And then in Revelation, when you get to the 144,000, now you have 12,000 from each tribe. Maybe there's something instructive here about the role of the 144,000, because they're a very mysterious group. Maybe there's something in this story with these 12,000 and this defeat of the Midianites that would help us understand what the 144,000 are doing. And then in this group, remember, Pinchas, the priest, went out in front of them with the utensils of the tabernacle and trumpets. And in Revelation, what do you see? You see censers, which are the utensils, and you see trumpets, okay? So I think this is tied to it. And then also in this battle, I don't know if you picked up on it, I believe there were 5 kings that were defeated. And there was another place where we saw five kings defeated, and that was with Abraham when Lot was taken, and he went and got him back. And he also got booty in that story, and there was some issues with the booty and what he did with it. And then in the middle of that whole thing with the booty, he meets Melchizedek. So those, I have some additional thoughts on numbers, and I just want to get this out there, and then you guys can do whatever you can, like your input. Just
I think that Wayne or Marie want to say something. Here.
Go ahead.
Wayne or Marie, did you want to chime in there?
No, I missed something, and it's kind of. Could you repeat the 12,000 men and the 144,000 that you just said? The concept, the idea.
In this battle, there was 1,000 from each tribe for a total of 12,000.
Okay.
In Revelation, there's 12,000 for a total of 145,000.
Okay.
So it's like 12. It's like times 12.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then we have the 5 kings and Abraham and Melchizedek. I know that as we've gone through here, there's always a question about that generation of the 12 spies, the ones that were buried in the wilderness and weren't allowed to enter the land. Will they be part of the kingdom? You know, are they damned forever? Or Korah? What's going to happen with Korah's eternal soul? You could say that all of them received an inheritance of land, if you look at it a certain way. They all opened their mouths against God's appointed. And they all had the ground open its mouth and swallow them. And that was the ground that they inherited. Korah's was very dramatic because it was like a sinkhole. But the whole generation, grave by grave by grave, they were swallowed up and inherited the land that was outside the promised land. Remember thinking about your body inside, outside the land, corrupted. Your thoughts on the destiny of those people need to be reconciled with what you think of Moses, too, because both Moses and Aaron were also buried out there in the wilderness. And yet, even though he was buried outside the land, you see him later on the Mount of Transfiguration, right? With Yeshua. So, at least in spirit, he was there. And I think when he was told he couldn't enter the land, part of the reason maybe why he used that expression, the God of spirits, of all spirits of flesh, was like him saying, I am a spirit with a body, not a body with a spirit. And yeah, I'm not sure exactly. That's something to sort out. But he didn't enter the land. Remember why? Because he struck the rock twice. But that's not the piece brought up here in this last chapter, or this last piece of Numbers. What Jehovah says to him is, you rebelled against my command to treat me holy in their eyes at the water. So it was like he disrespected God in the sight of the congregation when they were gathered to get water. Now, if we understand, and we talked about this, if we understand that rock that he struck as being Yeshua, and that he would only need to be struck once, he didn't need to be struck the second time, and that's maybe why Moses got in so much trouble, then you need to consider the passage in Hebrews. It's kind of a difficult one that speaks about those who again crucify the Son of God. And it sounds like it's talking about like those who backslide. They publicly fail to honor God in the presence of, you can think about a preacher who has publicly
what, backslidden or committed a sin? Or
Yeah, he was like
renounced his
there,
faith?
and then that just makes God look so bad. That I think that's dishonoring him in the sight of people, and I think that's destructive for the people out there that are looking at you. And I think that's what he means by this being that striking the rock twice and not crucifying him again. But that was just like a sideline to let this part of my brain chew on. I think that, like Marie, I believe this is the way she feels, that there are different groups of people assigned to different tasks and destinies. And if we look at the different groups in Revelation, if we try to just reconcile those groups with one destination or the other, I think we get all tangled up. Or what they deserve or what they don't deserve. When I do that, I start to feel like I'm on the wrong side of that parable about the workers who didn't work the same amount of time, but they all got paid the same, and then they were like, yeah, I don't know about this. I think we got to leave it up to the boss. Are we the ones that go through the fire? Are we a part of the third that gets... I mean, there's all kinds of these groups in Revelations and such, and you hear about their destinies, and we don't want to be a part of them. I want to be 144,000. Who do you want to be? Well, I want to be the group that gets swallowed up by the dragon. No, you don't. Let him just design what we're doing. Is someone saying something?
I think Marie might want to chime in.
Now, there's a very interesting part in when it's going over in Ezekiel, the temple, which I think is mostly spiritual. It talks about different groups of people in the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, that will be teaching. They led people astray, so now they will tell them the right thing. So it's very mysterious because these Levitical priests, whoever they are, at that time will be forced to teach the correct thing. So it's very interesting because I do think it's kind of spiritual, not spiritual. It is pointing to something in the future.
Yeah.
So there's all these little different categories that, he knows and we don't know. We're trying to figure out, but
We're all different parts of the body.
Yeah, yes.
What makes me think that those in the I suspect that those who fell in the wilderness are going to be there. I'm not sure quite how, but and what there's something about this section that really makes me pretty sure about that, and that's the vows for the woman, that the vows were different. And you have to remember, Israel was the wife of their father, and the things they said in the wilderness, he did oppose them, and he did forbid them. And so he will bear their iniquity, just like he's laid out in these vows for... Now, as far as after he divorced Israel, because these laws don't apply to the divorced woman, I'm not sure. That one scares me a little. I think I'll just stop with this rosy thinking that all those people, we'll see them there.
Well, that's a good thing to think about, though. I mean, it's not a good thing to think about, but it's something that needs to be considered. That this, the idea of the woman who is covered because of a covenant of marriage or a covenant under her father is going to be absolved of her perhaps foolish or rash vows. But a woman who is divorced or a widow does not have that same protection. So is there something to this where he is their husband and he covers their foolishness, or if he divorces them, is their foolishness covered? That's a great question, and it might apply to different people in different ways. It's just a really challenging section to look at. So I feel you. And I know Angela has you guys, as she is wont to do, that she does a lot. She brings in some deep, heavy things that really need to be sorted out. And, I encourage you to, take some time to dig a little bit deeper into some of these ideas. I know we're getting a little bit long in the tooth on time here.
I just want to hit a couple more things.
I know you hit a lot of stuff. Do you want to continue?
I have just.
She's going to throw out a couple more
I have
nuggets.
answers for none of them, but they're things to consider. that it's not so much about whether we enter or not, but how. How much purification do we need? Do we need fire? Do we need water? And then
that is a huge thing.
Yeah, I know
right
that's just
there.
a question. It's
I know,
rhetorical.
I know, it's a
Don't
huge
try to
question,
answer.
though.
Don't try to answer. Chapter 35 addresses the issue of not defiling the land. That this manslayer has to stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. And what does that make you think of?
That's Yeshua.
And then 3 of those cities are on the other side. They're out of the land. So that's another thing to think about. And then, for your last little piece, this is your dessert. The difference in the number from the first census to the last census
1,820 people.
was 1,820 people. 1,820 less.
Yep.
Now, there's a lot of real, I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole? Is that what you call it?
Squirrel hole.
No, they don't make holes. It's rabbit.
I'm messing with you, girl.
You go down a rabbit hole with this number stuff. The 1820, there's some things about it. And the one that I liked, it could be all of them, is apparently, I did not do the math. Somebody do the math for me, but just let me finish first. The number of Jacob's name times 10. And so maybe those that fell, you have those that fell in the wilderness, and you have those that entered the promised land, and the difference was 1820. Okay, so these are a little bit less. Maybe the 1820 is the fullness of Jacob, the spirit, that enter in spirit. They didn't enter physically. It looks like there's a gap there, but there's not, because embedded in the difference is all of Jacob, 10 times Jacob. I don't know.
That's interesting. Okay. Is that all you got?
That's all I got.
That's all she's got, folks. That's all she wrote. I have had you now for almost 2 hours.
You took too long.
Your patience, I apologize. Your patience is probably wearing thin. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. Does anybody have a comment, question, or concern regarding our study this evening? There's so much. We're not. Go ahead.
Me?
Yes, you.
Okay, just wanted to add in Acts 17, Paul talked about these people that we're talking about right now, and says, truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. So I think we sometimes look at the patriarchs and they kind of, I'm seeing where they probably, there's something different going on, how God is dealing with them. Because there are verses there where even when Yeshua said, if I did not come, you would have no sin. I don't understand that, and maybe you guys do, but there are several verses that clearly says, if I didn't come, you'd have no sin. So, okay. And then there's also the picture of why the first fruits, barley, didn't have leaven, but when the first fruits in Shavuot, you're allowed to have leaven in it. There's a lot of mystery there.
There is definitely a lot of mystery there, and I don't know what to make of it. And I'll tell you what. There's a lot of mystery surrounding, and I know that we should be. This statement that I'm about to make should shock you, but it's a real mystery about exactly what happened when Yeshua arrived on the planet. There are some things that are very clear to us, that he sacrificed himself for our sins. But as far as how this changes the nature of people's relationship to God, how this changes the priesthood, atoning, how this changes different elements of people, exactly what is the full implication of the Messiah Yeshua arriving on this planet and making sacrifice is really heavy stuff. And it's very, very complicated. And I think that that's a huge study in and of itself. Just exactly what did Yeshua do when he came onto this planet? It's not easy stuff to know. Tracy, go ahead, Wayne.
It's kind of similar to, like when we were just talking about how it seems like God, he said that he allowed them back then to do it but we have no excuse now. And also with the comparison that you just said about when Yeshua arrived, to me it's almost parallel to when Adam sinned, how everything changed. And we know that in Genesis only a few things are mentioned, like childbearing, but I am under the impression that everything as we know it changed. We can't imagine what perfect humans in the garden were like. I believe everything changed, because it even says how the whole creation is yearning for the revelation of the sons of men. The creation can't wait to change back to the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So Yeshua coming, like you just said, is similar to that change. What happened at that point when he arrived on this earth? How did the earth change? How did just the essence of life change?
I think that's a great question, Wayne, and I think that it's real similar, like you said, to when Adam sinned and the whole world fell. I think that it began to undo that process, and probably in a lot bigger ways and more profound ways and more complete ways than we even understand. But it's being revealed slowly. And I think that as the kingdom is established, we'll be spending a good amount of time trying to understand even then. I think that's some of the stuff that we need to be taught about what exactly he did and how he is undoing what was accomplished through the sin of Adam. Tracy?
Oh, I thought, Mike, did you have something to say, buddy?
Was it Mike?
I do too, but I wanted him to go over it. I was just going to say, regarding, God is no respecter of persons, and I believe that to mean over time as well. And that, Kevin, we were talking about the chiastic structure, and I think this whole Earth age is like a chiastic structure, and how there are 7 days of creation to set this pattern of the 7,000 years of days as 1,000 years of day. Brought my menorah to show you, but so I'm gonna go this way. So this is where we're gonna be ending up, kind of thing. But we started over here, so this is day 1. This is the garden, but the goal is to get back to the garden. So day 7 over here is that, but we work into the middle, which is the most important thing, is day 4, the 4,000th year, and that would be when Messiah came.
Yep.
So these people on one side are looking forward to him, and people on the other side are looking backward, but we're all looking to him. So I think this is this mirror we're looking into. So we want to know the Word of God is called a mirror. Messiah is the Word of God. He says, I don't know if she's still here. They're there. Wait a minute. That when he said, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would have no sin. I think that's an indication of how he's saying I'm the Torah, because the Torah defines sin. So he's saying if I'm coming to define sin has no power except through the Torah, because the Torah says this is sin. So I don't know, I just think that could be how we should look at it, I guess, is that it's more of a mirror. This word is a mirror. We look at it to see what kind of man we are, to correct us and to walk in his ways, so we may transform into not our image, but his image as we look into that word.
Absolutely.
Mike, where are you going to go? Maybe it's updates, but it also seems to be that it creates a certain level of tangibility in that, for example, when God did give Moses the Torah, and then we have Yeshua on the other end, actually, they're both very tangible things that happen, very tangible events. So this is given to you, and you know what it is now. You can touch it, feel it, and see it. And now he's here on earth with us. You can touch him, feel him, see him. But he's also that. So I can see where there's a parallel between saying, well, look, you really wouldn't know sin if I didn't come to you, because he basically personifies everything that Torah represents. So he's saying, it's me. I was here. Basically, he's been here twice then. He's been here when it was given, and now he's here. Now the spirit of who he is was here then, and he was there with them. And
that shadow picture is also there on Mount Sinai when Moses goes up and he receives the word, the Torah, the stone cut out of the mountain, which represents Messiah, comes down, gives them the word, but they're sin already, breaks the word in the earth. So Messiah was broken for us, and he goes back up and gets the same words, and the stones are resurrection again, if you will. So So that whole picture is there in the giving of the Torah, of the Messiahs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Mikey, did you want to pipe in?
Just only to add on to what was being said, I think it further illustrates the purpose, one of the purposes for him coming back and being sacrificed for us was to restore that covenant, and it goes back to what you briefly mentioned about him divorcing the house of Israel. And we often look back and say, well, is that breaking the Torah to remarry someone that he's been divorced from and they've defiled themselves? Well, it was his death and resurrection that freed him from that law, that allowed him to restore that house. So it's kind of the same picture, I guess.
Yeah.
There seems to be a high level of due process also. I mean, there's the idea of how things were going wrong before the Torah was given, although people may have known what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to live. The actual process of saying, okay, you know what it is, but now I'm really going to define it so you know specifically what it is. And then Yeshua coming and saying, hey, you know what these things are, but I'm really going to define what they're really supposed to be. And then the due process of saying, well, how do you actually get that again? You get it in that I have to die for you to actually remarry.
Yep, absolutely.
And then the third set of tablets are us. He's writing his Torah in us. So we're the spiritual set of tablets now for all known to be known and read by all men.
Yeah.
And the king, our Messiah, he is the king of Israel, and it's commanded in the Torah that he write a copy of the Torah for himself, which we are.
Which is why when he says it's necessary for me to leave so that the Spirit can come, that's what writes that on the hearts of men.
Yep.
No longer on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh.
Right.
Well, it's pretty unfortunate then that we define that as law as opposed to as God's true intention for how we're supposed to live. Really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Words matter.
Yeah.
They do. Awesome. Well, this has been very, very nice, you guys. Anything else? Good discussion tonight.